Seeing Bryce Young smile on the sidelines for the Carolina Panthers is like the first time you stay up too late watching Cartoon Network and see it morph into Adult Swim. You wonder if everyone else is seeing what you're seeing, and then you wonder if this is even allowed. Since Young was reinserted as the Panthers' starting quarterback, Carolina has won 2 of their last 5, with back-to-back losses coming on last-second field goals to the Kansas City Chiefs and Tampa Bay Buccaneers in overtime. And though the Panthers couldn't quite put these games away, it wasn't because of their former number 1 overall pick that they fell short. With 263 passing yards against the Chiefs and 298 this past Sunday, Young became the first Carolina quarterback with the consecutive 250-plus passing yards and no turnovers since 2012 when Cam Newton did it. But not even 3 months ago, he'd been benched in favor of a 37-year-old Andy Dalton. There was a real chance we may never see him again. Carolina had given up a treasure chest of top picks and DJ Moore for what looked like an undersized and overwhelmed quarterback flaming out just 18 starts into his career. Compared to the first 18 games of 94 other quarterbacks selected in the first and second round since 2000, Bryce Young ranks 78th in passing touchdowns, 71st in passer rating, 86th in success rate, and his 68 sacks ranks second behind only David Carr. So, what the hell happened from then to now? Is Bryce Young just suddenly good now?
Nah, probably not, but...
Let's put his numbers into perspective. Since week 8, Young ranks 27th in completion percentage and success rate and 28th in passer rating. The unit as a whole, meanwhile, is 21st in yards per play and 23rd in points scored. He hasn't suddenly become an elite passer or transformed Carolina into a top 10 offense. Rather, it's that he and the team look light years ahead of where they looked after his first 2 starts, which Carolina lost by a combined 60 points. But that's not to say there aren't plenty of things he can hang his hat on, like how over the past 6 weeks, he's been statistically better than the 2023 second overall pick CJ Stroud, or how he and the Panthers got some revenge on the Saints after they embarrassed them in week 1. Or, and this is my personal favorite, the fact he threw such a gorgeous ball against Tampa Bay that I audibly gasped and declared it to everyone who would listen that it was the best pass of his career. We're a minute into the second quarter, and the Bucs are sending 5 to make Young uncomfortable. The pass rush gets there immediately, but Bryce makes a quick move to evade it and get out on the run. Now, we're going to slow it down here. The actual throw he makes is insane, just ripping it through the air like a missile on a rope and right into Tommy Tremble's hands is one thing, but I'm almost more floored by the anticipation and chemistry Young shows off here with his receiver. When we pause here, we see that he's made his decision to launch this one over and beyond the defense. Check out how the ball is already in the air before Tremble makes his move and throws a hand up to call for the ball. Young saw this from a mile away and trusted his receiver to also find the open space. A real thing of beauty. Overall, Young has just looked more confident behind center. It can be difficult to quantify what exactly that means, so we'll dive into where it's showing up on the stat sheet and on the field. Quarterback development has been a tricky subject this year. NFL.com's Bucky Brooks wrote recently about the second-year quarterbacks experiencing different forms of sophomore slumps and bumps. In it, he references the 3 Ps most associated with quarterback success: play calling, playmakers, and pass protectors. From what I can tell, head coach David Canales hasn't adjusted his play calling too much. The ratio of run to pass plays has remained nearly identical, and the concepts on the screen from earlier in the season to more recently didn't appear overhauled by any means. But the other 2 Ps get interesting. First, playmakers. In Young's first 2 starts, Deontay Johnson was the primary target with 21% of Young's pass attempts going his way, followed by Xavier Legette, Jonathan Mingo, and Adam Thielen, all tied at 12.7%. Johnson has since been traded to the Baltimore Ravens, where he's now having internal issues after refusing to enter their game against the Eagles. While it's impossible for me to speak on his relationship inside the Panthers locker room generally, or with Young specifically, maybe it's no coincidence that 2 of Young's 3 picks during this stretch came on passes forced to disgruntled Deontay Johnson. In his previous 5 starts, Dave Moore and Legette have shot up in target share to 20.3 and 19.7% respectively. Legette in particular has become a fixture throughout these recent Panthers games. As for pass protection, I think it's easy to see a guy with a 10% sack rate for his career and blame the O-line for his shortcomings, but I came away thinking Bryce was making this line look much worse than it actually is. Let's take a look at how Young's first 2 games compare to Dalton's 5 and then his most recent stint. In those first 2 starts, Young was sacked 6 times at a 9.68% sack rate. In Dalton's 5 starts, he was sacked 7 times at a 4.19% rate. And now, in Young's 5 most recent starts, he's doing a Dalton impression, getting sacked only 7 times at a 3.98% rate. All the while, Carolina's offensive line has stayed mostly intact throughout the season, with one major replacement being Cade Mays at center for an injured Austin Corbett. The fact Young's new sack numbers are so close to Dalton's suggests that the improvement in sack rate is probably more a function of Bryce adjusting his game than the line simply playing better. On the more visible front, Young is using his legs better than before. Whether it's escaping pressure to then throw a dime on the run, or just scrambling up the middle for a nice pickup, he's gotten much more assertive at dealing with pressure. On the less visible front, I saw a lot less questionable pass protection calls like this hot mess from week 1. The Saints start with 8 guys pressed up at the line of scrimmage against only 6 Carolina blockers. Young motions over his running back to help in the pass protection, making the equation 8 against 7. Solid move, in theory. And yeah, sure, as a quarterback you don't love those numbers, but now one of 2 things can happen. Either the defense will actually send all 8, and you throw quickly against a thin secondary, or they drop 1 or more guys into coverage, and you use the extra protection to find the opening. Only, Young and the Panthers give the Saints the best of both worlds. They're able to drop a guy out into coverage and still get the free rusher, all due to how Carolina aligned pre-play. When we split the center and look at the left side of the line, we see 4 Saints against 2 Panthers blockers. On the right side, 3 Saints against 4 Panthers, and in the middle, we have a one-on-one. At the snap, Carolina's center is forced to block right, so in essence, they have 5 blockers for 4 pass rushers on the right, and only 2 for 4 on the left. To be fair, 1 Saint does drop out, but still, they're setting themselves up for failure here. Bryce Young and the players on the Panthers offense understand their pass protection schemes more than I ever will, no doubt, but if this is me, I'm just having my back set up and help on the opposite side. I wanted to spend a little extra time on this play because I viewed it as a microcosm of Young's first 2 weeks, overwhelmed and making bad decisions that snowballed into worse ones. I can imagine Young's head racing. Which concepts will open up? Which Saint is bluffing the blitz? What if they all come? Will disgruntled Deontay be upset if he doesn't get the ball? What about the tight end blocking the edge? Does that make sense? What if this play goes perfectly? What if it goes horribly? And so on, up until the ball gets into his hands and a guy comes barreling off the edge to take his head off. When, really, he just has to count helmets, give himself the best chance pre-snap, and then just let it rip. By both using his mobility more aggressively and reducing these pass protection gaffes, Young is performing much better behind a nearly identical line from earlier this year. Alright, with the 3 Ps settled, let's go further into the film and get a fuller picture of what Young is doing well and where he needs to improve. First, let's talk about Young's sense of anticipation. It's the part of his game that jumped off the screen for me. It isn't always on display, and we'll talk more about why later, but when it is, he's throwing incredibly early and making extra space for his receivers. This pass against the Chiefs was one of the cleanest plays I saw from Bryce throughout my study of him. Kansas City meanders around pre-snap before settling into a single high safety look. This, combined with defenders aligned over top of their matchups, and, more specifically, the press coverage and inside leverage played by this outside corner, suggests that the Chiefs are in man coverage. As Young takes the snap, he peeks over to that same side. By aggressively pressing the receiver and then following them inside, he confirms what he saw pre-snap. And now he also knows exactly where to go. The Panthers have a smash concept called on the right side that's a perfect beater against this defense. The slot receiver's deep outside corner route is the target here. The X's shallow cross to the middle vacates the space in front of him, while the Y's deep post gets in the way of the slot's defender, forcing a switch and pulling the deep safety further downfield and out of the play. Seeing everything go as planned, Young shows off his confidence, ripping this one as his receiver is untangling himself from the makeshift screen his teammates sent. Right as he's opened up the maximum amount of space for himself, the ball is already on its way down and landing safely in his hands. These are the plays that make people say stuff like, well, he was a number 1 overall pick for a reason, after all. This ability to anticipate throws has been there all along, even when Young was in his disaster era. Maybe the brightest 5 seconds of Bryce's week 1 was this slant he hit Thielen on to convert on 3rd down. The throw is decisive, quick, and confident as he fits it between 2 defenders and in front of another. If he can nurture that high football IQ that he was touted having coming out of college, he'll be able to manage and move an NFL offense by finding these openings. And fun fact, this was only one of 2 3rd downs that the Panthers converted throughout the first 2 weeks of the season. 2 for 22 gave them a 9.1% conversion rate, which surprisingly ranked 21st, and I'm just joking, of course they were dead last. Over their past 5 games though, they've grown this to a much more respectable 38.2%, ranking 17th in the league, and I'm serious about that one. Next, let's talk about footwork. If you've watched Young for any length of time, you've probably noticed he's got a pretty gross drop back where he backpedals with his body perpendicular to the sidelines. Different from the traditional drop back where the QB keeps his shoulders more parallel with them. My guess is this has to do with his height and giving him a better chance to see over the line before getting into his throwing stance. And while I'm sure there's a way to make this work, his dropbacks right now often feel arrhythmic and sloppy, leading to happy feet that make him late to decisions or throw with a weak platform. You can find way more of these instances earlier this year, like his awkward chicken leg platform here in week 1 that leads to an overthrow. But bad footwork still rears its ugly head today. Here's Young's touchdown scramble against Tampa Bay. Obviously, it's hard to be too critical when he made it work for the score, but a routine pass to Leggett would have been open had he just been stronger with his drop back. His backpedal drop back gets him off balanced as the steps are at various lengths and tempos, and when he should be hitting the top of his drop back and snapping to whip this one to the receiver, his momentum carries him backwards and he can't set up properly. Still, credit to Young for staying calm and then finding the hole through the line to make good on this opportunity anyways. Later, in the same game, he redeems himself with a similar opportunity to Thielen. The feet here are much stronger and in rhythm with the rest of the play. He hits the top of his drop back right as Thielen is making his break. Now, if only Thielen could have gotten a better grasp of this ball, but process-wise, I much prefer what I saw from Young on this play than I did on the actual touchdown. Footwork remains one of my biggest concerns with Young right now. I think it's a key to his being more consistent and keeping the Panthers' offense on schedule. And the last thing I wanted to talk about was how Young is handling disguised coverages. While watching him, I wasn't totally convinced that he was really internalizing what the safeties were doing post-snap. I call out his reading of the safeties because I often view them as the window to what coverage the defense is playing. Here's a great example of how a disguised coverage against the Bucs not only changes where Young wants to go with the ball initially, but also affects his entire body and footwork too. By not being comfortable with this misdirection, Young gets his pocket presence disrupted by not only the pass rush, but the coverage as well. Tampa Bay comes out with a single high safety pre-snap. With both cornerbacks playing 7 yards deep, Young can reasonably assume he's getting cover 3. Because of that, he wants to hit either the seam between the 2 defenders on the right side or the curl at the bottom of the screen in front of the corner. But look at how the Bucs morph their look into a Tampa 2 concept. The right side corner is now covering the whole right half of the field rather than a third of it, while the middle linebacker takes away the passing lane for the seam. All the while, the nickelback sprints to the shallow flat to get in front of the curl. Seeing this, Young's whole body reacts and he almost panics into pressure. He does find the open check down for a nice pickup, but a more mature version of Bryce sees the right side was taken away and stays calm as he moves his eyes across the field to find the open guy. Playing against these more complicated defenses can highlight some of his worst habits. He'll need to become more comfortable in reading these out quickly to continue his success. The biggest difference between Bryce Young at the beginning of the season to now is that I actually believe there is a mature, polished quarterback somewhere inside of him. Before, I viewed him more as a punchline and punching bag, while today, I view his revival as one of the most inspiring and exciting storylines in the league. The wildest part of this whole thing is that the Panthers weren't ready to bring him back when they did. Instead, a car accident that broke Dalton's thumb changed Young's fate. Even after notching the win over New Orleans in Week 9, Coach Canales remained non-committal. It wasn't until his victory over the Giants the following week that Canales said Young had made a statement. He finally reclaimed the starting position and hasn't looked back since. Of course, all these good feelings could come crashing against a brick wall when the Panthers face the fourth best defense by EPA in the Philadelphia Eagles this Sunday. But even if it's a disaster, I think all of us are much more inclined to view it as a blip on Bryce Young's redemption arc than a confirmation of just how big of a bust he is. And to so drastically change the general opinion of him over the course of 5 weeks is a pretty spectacular feat in itself. Make no mistake though, he has a long way to go. The easy part of his development is over. Playing at a solid baseline you can build around should have been a given. Now it's time to see if all of this was actually real and just how much better he can get. Thank you so much for watching this video. Please remember to give it a like if you did enjoy it and consider subscribing to the channel so you can catch the next one. Thanks, bye.